And thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the pressure is building on Vladimir Putin with more sanctions coming on Russia to try to prevent more escalation in Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Israel, taking in Jews who are fleeing Ukraine to live in Israel. Plus, Venezuelans flee to other countries searching for a better future.
We are hearing there's a possibility that the U.S. is going to give out permits to work, go to school and such.
We have more coming up. And we sit down with hip-hop artist Lecrae. He talks new music and more. Then later, see details on a special project that is helping children in need to sleep better. All these stories and more are coming up from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin with the intensifying international backlash as Russian President Vladimir Putin has begun his military invasion of Ukraine. President Biden unveiled what he says is the first of many significant economic sanctions meant to hurt Russia and deter further escalation. Our Charlene Aaron is on this story.
The Biden administration calls Vladimir Putin's move into parts of eastern Ukraine the beginning of an invasion and is responding with harsh sanctions against Russian banks, lawmakers, and businessmen.
He bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine.
CBN's George Thomas reports those provinces are seeing a heavy uptick in fighting.
Now that Russia has rolled its tanks across parts of Donbas region, attacks against Ukrainian positions have been spiking. Since Monday's invasion, there have been more than 5,000 ceasefire violations, the overwhelming majority of them committed by Russian forces. The Ukrainian military has been holding back, trying not to give Putin the excuse for a full-scale invasion. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky is calling up some 250,000 reservists as new satellite images show Moscow deploying more forces to Belarus and Western Russia.
Russian lawmakers approved Putin's request to use military force outside of Russia. In response, the U.S. is imposing punishing sanctions on Russian banks, business elites, and their families.
We've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West.
Senator James Langford on what those sanctions mean for the Kremlin.
Russia has a smaller GDP, gross domestic product, than the state of Texas has. They're basically a gas station that's selling oil and natural gas to Europe and to Asia and whoever wants to be able to buy it. If we cut that off, Russia's economy collapses and Putin faces real consequences.
The European Union also imposing sanctions, with Germany freezing a major new Russian natural gas pipeline known as Nord Stream 2. 800 U.S. troops, along with fighter jets and helicopters, are being repositioned to support NATO members in the Baltic states. The sanctions expected to have an impact here at home. Gas prices are already up 20% over last month. And if Russia's spigot is turned off, those prices could go even higher. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
The tension in Ukraine is leading Israel to push its citizens to leave that country. As CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell shows us, some Ukrainian Jews are taking the next step and making Israel their home.
Nearly half of the passengers on this Ukrainian flight are immigrating to Israel.
We are very excited that you're here.
Minister of Aliyah and Integration Peninnah Tamano-shata welcomed the newcomers.
Our message is very clear for the Jews of Ukraine. The state of Israel will always be open for them, for whoever chooses to come here, to embrace them, to accompany them. And certainly all of us are praying that the tension won't prevail and a war won't break out between Russia and Ukraine.
Dozens of Ukrainian Jews on this flight are some of the regular arrivals sponsored by the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Given the precarious situation in Ukraine, it's expected many more Ukrainian Jews will make their way here to Israel.
Israel was created to be a safe haven for the Jewish people.
The organization has helped Jews return to Israel for decades.
This is biblical prophecy coming to fruition. When you read the scriptures, how awesome is it that you don't only see it unfolding before your eyes, but that you're taking part in it? This is all possible, everything. All of these new immigrants coming off the plane in Israel, the fulfillment not only of their dream, but the dream of the prophets 2,500 years ago, is possible because Christians and Jews came together to bring them home.
Although not a rescue flight, the passengers are glad to be free from an uncertain situation.
We're scared because we don't know what happened, and we hope for our flight. We wait, and we waiting for our flight, and we're very happy that we are now in Israel.
3 generations of the Zelensky family made the trip.
We had a business in Donetsk. The first time they bombed all the businesses. Now we're afraid we'll lose everything again. Things are dangerous, and that's why we immigrated.
It's an unbelievable experience.
Reverend Johnny Moore, president of the Congress of Christian Leaders, says as a parent, he was happy to see freedom for these children.
I just put myself in their shoes, the opportunity to be able to go someplace. And that's what the state of Israel is for the Jewish people all around the world. If they need to, should they choose to, whatever their reasons. And I'm so proud that the Christian community, for a full generation, has decided to take personal responsibility to bless the people of Israel in this very, very, very practical way.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv.
Back here at home, the Supreme Court will take up another case involving freedom of religion versus the rights of LGBTQ people. The case involves Colorado graphic and website designer Lori Smith. She offers graphic and website design services and wants to expand to wedding website services, but she says her Christian beliefs would lead her to decline any request from a same-sex couple to design a wedding website. She also wants to post a statement on her website about her beliefs, but those things would run afoul of Colorado's anti-discrimination law. Smith argued the law violates her free speech and religious rights. Her legal defense team from Alliance Defending Freedom says this could be a, quote, landmark case for religious liberty and artistic freedom. Inspired by the Canadian trucker protests against COVID restrictions, a group of U.S. truckers is traveling cross-country for their own protest. Starting in Southern California Tuesday, the People's Envoy plans on making about 10 stops on its way to Washington, D.C. The group won't enter the district itself when it arrives next week and says it will abide by agreements with local authorities. Group members are calling for an end to the COVID national emergency extension that the president extended earlier this month, as well as withdrawal of the mask and vaccine mandates. Well, Monday marked President's Day, the national holiday honoring all U.S. presidents, and Tuesday was George Washington's birthday. In line with that, a new inspirational documentary is coming out, shedding light on his extraordinary life and the deep faith of the first president, who's also known as the father of our country. CBN's Jenna Browder shows us more.
When we look at George Washington, we're clearly looking at the great icon of our country, the United States.
George Washington, one in a 7-part documentary series produced by the Providence Forum.
A man who has given his name to our capital city. He was called the father of this country in his own lifetime. He has been called by historians the indispensable man. They look to Washington as a general.
Author and executive director Jerry Newcomb.
The purpose of this series, which is called the Foundation of American Liberty series, and if anybody asks me, well, what's the foundation of American liberty? It's our Judeo-Christian heritage. It's the fact that our founders said that our rights come from the Creator, and that has been the source of America's greatness. And George Washington, as a man, was indispensable in helping create America.
George Washington really was that man we see kneeling beside his horse, praying.
Our first commander-in-chief who led a ragtag army of farmers and merchants to defeat the strongest military in the world. And when he had the chance to rule, he pushed power away, refusing to be king.
A particular example was one of a handful, which were very important examples of George Washington choosing the Christian type of leadership, servant leadership.
And Newcomb adds, God placed his hand on Washington early in life.
In 1755, when he was a young man in his 20s, and he was an American officer in the British Army during the French and Indian War. And there was a massacre that occurred in which all the officers on the American and the British side were killed except one, and that was George Washington. And it wasn't because they didn't try. They actually tried. They even aimed their guns at him. And by God's grace, he was spared. He had horses shot out from under him. He had 4 bullet holes in his cloak. He had to actually write his brother, John Augustine, and send a letter saying, "You may have heard that I died. I didn't, by God's grace."
There's no doubt Washington had God's favor. This documentary highlights that and the ways God was with Washington as a man and as he became the great leader we now celebrate today. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
To learn where to see the documentary, check out our website, cbnnews.com. Coming up, it is the largest migration in Venezuela's history. Find out why they are fleeing and where they're headed when we come back. The economic collapse in Venezuela caused one of the largest mass migrations in modern history. Venezuelans have been flooding the United States' southern border. Now, many of the migrants are choosing a different destination. Chuck Holton is on this story.
A young Venezuelan boy is captured eating garbage on local news near the Colombian border. Experts say 95% of Venezuela's population is caught in the grip of this kind of crushing poverty. So it's no wonder almost 20% of the country's population have fled. And here on Venezuela's border with Colombia, thousands more are leaving every day.
Well, right now in Cúcuta, things are pretty tough because everything is expensive. It's almost as bad here now as Venezuela. So people are fleeing to other countries because it's getting to be too hard here.
Anybody who had the resources to leave Venezuela did so a long time ago, unless they are somehow connected to the criminal narco state that Venezuela has become. But this bridge between Colombia and Venezuela at Cúcuta, Colombia, is the place where the poorest of the poor leave Venezuela on foot. They come out of here carrying everything they can on their back or pulling a suitcase behind them. And where they go from here depends a lot on the policies of the governments of the places they want to go to.
For example,
we are hearing there's a possibility that the U.S. is going to give out permits to work, go to school and such. This is what we're hearing, that President Biden is going to give us permission to enter as they did here in Colombia.
Really, right now the rate has increased at which my fellow Venezuelans are leaving the country. The number staying in Colombia has gone down. They'd rather try for other destinations.
But the road to the U.S. is long, expensive, and fraught with danger. It includes a 6-day walk through the forbidding Darien Gap, where perhaps 1 in 10 die in the jungle. That's led many Venezuelans to take a slightly shorter and safer option, traveling south to Chile. It has the highest standard of living in Latin America, where Venezuelans can easily earn more in a day than they can in a month back home. This influx of humanity, however, has local residents up in arms. Chileans recently protested, calling for stricter immigration controls in the city of Iquique.
People are unhappy. There are many migrants, a lack of control of the borders. But worst of all is the crime that has arrived with the migrants and illegal migration.
These protests are becoming more frequent and leave migrants feeling decidedly unwelcome.
The town of Desaguadero kind of spans this river between Bolivia and Peru, and I'm crossing the river right now, illegally I might add, just like thousands and thousands of people are this morning. Many of them are coming from places like Venezuela on their way to Chile, but there are also migrants that are coming from Bolivia heading north.
Now, even as migrants still trek to Chile, many who have been there for years are heading elsewhere.
Right now, people are much more interested in going to the United States than they are to Chile.
This has added to a 14-fold increase in the number of Venezuelans arriving at the U.S. southern border in the past year. And the overwhelmed U.S. State Department is quietly pressuring the Mexican government to help staunch the flow. To that end, Mexican authorities announced a new visa requirement for Venezuelan nationals entering their country after January 21st. The move has many Venezuelans frustrated.
Sure, people at this moment are more afraid to enter Mexico than before, because they might lose what they've invested in getting there. But they know they'd be better off if they can make it to the U.S. Some will keep risking it, but many others don't want to go because they won't just lose their own money, but also the money they've borrowed for the journey. So this has had a large influence on those who no longer want to immigrate to the U.S. But that won't change the fact that the center of attraction for us is still the United States.
So until things improve in Venezuela, these migrants will keep leaving and having to weigh the risks of heading north or south in search of a better future. From Cúcuta, Colombia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Still ahead, we're sitting down with hip-hop artist Lecrae as he talks about his new music project and so much more. Stay with us. Rapper, husband, father, and best-selling author Lecrae, as well as Reach Records label creator, is breaking news in our sit-down this week. He's also sharing music from his latest project, and it's called No Church in a While. The latest album is No Church in a While, and it's funny that it comes out when churches actually are not uniting, at least in person. What sparked this idea, and how did the union between you and 1K Few, I mean, a whole album collaborated? How did that happen?
Little finger, diamond sleeping with the fish. She thought I was playing, had to end it with no kizzy.
I'm starting to work on my project, Church Clothes, my solo project, and I got to thinking, like, can I really talk about church clothes and church if people haven't even been going to church in a while? It's more I would survey, specifically like people, 40 and under, they were a little jaded, or they were figuring out if they were going back after the pandemic. It was kind of like, wow, there's so many various perspectives going on here that I think I need to not speak into a vacuum, but really do some investigation. And as I started to investigate, I learned that people, for many different reasons, weren't going to gatherings with congregations in buildings. And so I said, well, let's talk about this. Let's unpack this. Why is that? And this album was an opportunity to address those particular issues, but at the same time, encourage people that we still need each other, and we can vent, we can be cathartic, but let's not just be silent about it. Let's talk about it so we can work through it.
So there is still a place for the church in your mind?
Absolutely. I mean, the church is, the church is biblical. We are the church as a body, but then there's also, structure put in place in order to have, decency and order. And so those are things that I want to respect. But I do think that we have to be careful when we start blending more cultural things and instituting those cultural mandates. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to fight against that traditionalism, especially in America, where if church doesn't look like this, mm-hmm. it's not being done right.
Mm-hmm. One of the singles on the album is Move.
I like to move it, so please get out the way, excuse me.
Tell me about that particular track.
Yeah, Move is it's kind of a fun track in a sense of just saying, let's get on the move. Let's keep the ball rolling, and let's figure out what we're doing, because a lot of us want to sit still and just ponder and say, man, I just don't like the way things are going. It's like, no, let's move. We're still on the move. So it's fun. In one sense, it's move, like move your body, move something. But in another sense, it's like, let's stay on the move. God is on the move. We're his children. We're exiles. Let's move as God is moving, and so we're not going to stay in the desert forever. We're still trying to get to the promised land. And so let's move.
If you had to pick a favorite track from that project today, what would it be?
I'd probably say it's right now, it's Save Us. And Save Us is really just an articulation that, God, we need you. We need you. And we're some hard times. We've never experienced anything like this in our lifetimes. A global pandemic, political divides, racial divides. It's just all happening at one time. And so Save Us is really just saying, God, intervene and help us understand how we should be moving.
I have to say, looking at Reach's website, the label's growing. Will we see a tour with some of these artists soon?
You absolutely will. The Unashamed tour, something that we've been doing for years. My goodness, at least over a decade. And so we want to continue keeping that thing moving. And, you know, we'll be touring from city to city. All the artists on the label will be out there, and so it'll be a good time, a great time.
Feel it in my body, can't nobody stop it. Dripping like fluid, let my light shine like jewelry. Gotta stay humble, give it up. World is jungle, give it up, give it up.
Tickets are on sale right now for the Unashamed Tour. For more uplifting entertainment stories like this, be sure to check out an all-new edition of Studio 5. Tonight, we're talking about mental health with Futures Worship. We're looking at Disney's new reboot of The Proud Family, and we're sampling the sound of passion music with singer Melody Malone. You can catch it all on Studio 5 this evening, beginning at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time on the CBN News Channel. You can download the CBN News app to watch it on demand. Coming up, this guy's charity is bringing a good night's sleep to children in need. We're going to show you how. Coming up after the break. A retirement project Gary Burns began 3 years ago is taking on new meaning. Sleep in Heavenly Peace delivers beds to children in need. Gary's garage is now filled with wood, fabric, and the tools he uses to make the beds. Each child gets a bed frame, mattress, pillow, and linens. He's now looking for a warehouse space so his chapter of the Sleep in Heavenly Peace charity can bring a good night's sleep to even more children. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is word. Know this, our world began with God speaking a word, and it's his word that became flesh and came to earth in the form of his son. Embrace his word, wait on him, work while you wait, and you will see and experience the wonder of his great work. With that word, make this a wonderful Wednesday and a wonder-filled rest of the week. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel or online at cbnnews.com. You can let us know what you think of the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com and reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. See you back here tomorrow.